Okay, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on e-bike rebate programs. We're really excited to share what we've learned over the last couple of years running these programs. 10 active across the country right now and a couple more coming very soon. Needless to say, we've learned a lot along the way, and we will be sharing that with you today. Today's agenda, we'll do some quick introductions. Joel will talk at a high level about our program structure and some key thoughts around those programs. Myself and my colleague Madeline will get in a little deeper into the details with some design considerations, our system, the EMobility for All system, a little bit of an overview of our portal, and then we'll go into spotlight on the Tacoma program, and then we'll leave ample time for questions at the end. While we move through the slides, feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll try to either cycle through those while we're presenting or make sure we get to them in the Q&A section at the end. With that, we'll do brief introductions. My colleague Joel Friedling is here. He's our National Sales Director who created the first program, the Denver program that APTIM ran, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. I'm Dan Reese. I am the National Director of Energy and E-Mobility Programs at APTIM. Madeline Gully is a program manager for several of our successful programs in the East and Central time zones. And then Kristen has joined us from City of Tacoma to highlight her experience this past spring, summer, running a program with us. And next slide here goes over to you, Joel.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So quickly, we've been fortunate to have a lot of great clients like Kristen. So as Dan mentioned, we've got 10 that we've running now. We got 2 that are going to start early next year, and I've already crossed the 25,000 e-bike, and including another 8,000 of equipment. And that's another one thing that we, always would stress. It's important to not just think about the e-bikes, but the other things that go along with it. And so we think there's an important lesson that we got from, I think Boulder was the first one to really sort of focus on not just the bike, but the equipment's particularly around safety. And we've learned a lot. We have about 300 retailers that are working across all of our programs. And so we're fortunate to have a lot of people on our team too who come from that background. One who ran a store, Madeline who managed a store, and another from colleague from OEM. And just, at a high level, I think we've been fascinated and excited by the interest, right? I think globally we've all seen that in some ways, right, e-bikes are surpassing EVs as a sort of predominant electric mobility option that people are seeing. And just 2 quick things that I think we've learned surprising and that are, exciting about what we're seeing. I think number one is, I think we all, us and maybe the clients as well, just sort of underestimated the importance of e-bikes to just mobility generally. That I think, some of the most exciting stories are just the ability of e-bikes to change people's lives, to just be able to get out of the house, particularly with accessibility issues. And so that's an important thing to think about, is it's not just a sort of cargo bike, but also adaptive bikes. They can be more expensive and certainly, some of the most life-changing elements. The second thing I think that we're seeing more and more across the world, I think, is for a little bit of a higher income people, like middle income, the importance of e-bikes to getting rid of a second car. I just got hit with my insurance premium that went up 50% for our cars here. So I think we're underappreciating the impact of e-bikes on people's financial health. And in today's world, that's a really important element of this. Go to the next slide. So Dan's going to talk much more in depth about this. I think the important thing is to realize when you're thinking about an e-bike program, there really are multiple elements you have to consider from the design, and there's some important questions that we've learned along the way. We now have a design element that has almost like 50 different things to think about. Obviously, outreach and engagement, whether it's the retailers or community-based organizations or important partners. You have to deal with applications, and obviously how you distribute the vouchers, how you distribute payments. And then lastly, I think a lot of our customers, and I think people are really focused on what are the evaluation, how are these programs helping people, I think is an important thing, that we're going to have more and more e-bike programs, the better we can tell the story about their impacts. And so we're excited by a lot of the work that a lot of our partners are doing on the programs. I think one of the first lessons that we had, Dan mentioned my role at the Denver. So Denver was the first, major large program, and I think the first to really understand that first come, first serve models are complicated. They really are generally unfair to a lot of people who have sort of issues with language, issues with connections, issues with an inability to get to their computer at the right moment. I mean, in Denver, because of popularity, the e-bike vouchers are going within minutes. And so somebody who can't be at a computer all day, they're just at a disadvantage. And I think what we like to say is, I think the important thing is because of the popularity, it's not uncommon for there to be 10 times the number of people interested in getting a voucher than we have budget available. So how do we make sure we can get these things out fairly and get it to the people who need it most? And so we developed this EM for all process. I think the most important thing is our sort of lesson of separating out, getting people signed up, then having a selection event, and then the application. It just allows people to have more time and to get attention and dedicated help they may need. A lot of times people have issues, they're just less familiar with technology. And so I think having this separation and an ability to help people is important. Next slide. One of the things to think about, obviously, is where's the money? We've been fortunate to have a bunch of different things. I think we've got several that have federal funds. Obviously, that's probably going to go by the wayside. So I think it's going to come through state. We're fortunate we have our first utility program this year with Ava Community Energy out in the Bay Area. And I think that's going to be a growth. We've seen a lot of interest by utilities and in philanthropy. So City of Bentonville is 100% funded by philanthropy. And I think that's another opportunity that I think we hope to see more of going forward. So always looking for partners and happy to do whatever we can, again, tell the story about why these programs are important. You're on mute, Dan.
It always gets me. I'm going to take a little time to go a little deeper on a couple of the elements that Joel presented in the roadmap a couple slides back. First is when you're designing a program, some key things to consider. First and foremost is, just really getting detailed on the objectives of the program, what you're really trying to accomplish. We all know we're trying to get X number of e-bikes on the road, but how do you want those delivered? What kind of customer or applicant and bike retailer experience do you want to present? There's a lot of considerations, such as, what your retailer network will look like. Typically in the programs that we run, we advocate for local brick and mortar stores, for example, for many reasons. Some having to do with safety. Brick and mortar stores will be better partners in terms of you'll know what kind of product you're putting out there, that you have bikes that are certified with batteries that are certified, for example. And other advantages are you keep the dollars in the community, and you're able to provide a place where the applicant can have their bike maintenance over time. So often bike shops won't offer maintenance on an e-bike that they don't sell. This does eliminate some of the less expensive bikes that you might find online or on Amazon, but we see this as an advantage because there can be safety issues there. Need to consider, the budget and scale of the operation. If it's a smaller program, if you're looking to get 100 or 200 out there over a year or two, it may not make sense to bring in a third party like ourselves to build a portal and build all this process and workflow, because it might not make sense at that scale. But as you get to larger quantities or more specific sort of targeting you want to do in the market, a system like this, like the one we've deployed in 10 different geographies across the US, might make sense for you. The market segmentation, who do you want to deliver these benefits to? What's their goals? Is it really around carbon reduction only, or is it helping disadvantaged communities? Is there a sort of distribution that you want to get across your territory? We've seen all different flavors of that in terms of our clients' priorities. And being able to detail those out in the beginning and then design around that is really important to get that impact you want. Accessibility requirements becomes, I think, an important piece as well. I mean, there's a number of different ways to look at accessibility. One is just the physical representation of the documents and the portal that you put up, or the websites you put up, so that they meet certain standards, which we strive for in all of our work. But there's also some of the things that Joel was mentioning, in how you present the opportunity. Are people being helped to understand what, for example, what an e-bike is, how to get onto the portal, how to interpret things, what kind of e-bike is the right fit for them? It's about taking away the barriers that might stand between someone and getting a voucher and making the decision on a bike and knowing where to go for a bike. So there's a significant amount of education, applicant preparation that can go in there, and support along the way that needs to be planned out. Going a little forward here, we spend some time in order to support some of those items I talked about before. During the design process, it's also important to think about what is going to qualify a bike retailer. What kind of standards you want them to meet, what kind of inventory you want them to have, and that gets into eligible bike types. We are also proponents of having a qualified product list and establishing that with the bike network or the bike retailer network, so that we're inclusive of all the models they carry if they meet certain standards, and we make it easy for them to identify those bikes as they're sold, and we can quickly say, qualify them for the rebate. It eliminates downstream problems of obviously the safety and the quality issues, but also, if retailers are clear on what bikes are eligible, you're not going to have some confusion in their shop when a voucher holder comes and says, I want this bike, and learns it's not eligible. We can kind of head that off and improve the experience overall. Bike retailers, this is added administration for them. So we work to make it very easy. There are some things you can't get around. We need the documentation. We need to see the transaction details. But if you can provide some training and support along with that, so it makes the process easier and non-disruptive to their workflow, it's a much better experience. They're going to be more supportive of your program and help more customers through it, and that's what we all want in the end. And then on the marketing side, demand, as Joel mentioned, is typically much higher than you would expect. So it's less about driving demand, but more about educating and helping your population understand what is coming, why it's beneficial, what you should think about, what you should be ready for, and kind of how to walk through the system and make the decisions that get you from, I think I want a bike, to I'm going to get a voucher, here's the bike I want, and achieving that. So that's where more of the effort goes typically than versus driving demand. And we've seen success in sort of making sure that we get certain markets or certain segments of the market involved, and there is some effort that can be valuable there, but it's not a sort of mass marketing drive excitement because it's already there. And then the last piece, various things to consider when you're looking at how you're going to distribute these vouchers and what your model is going to be. There's I think a valuable thought exercise to do up front. How many voucher releases do you want to have, and in what quantities during the year? Is your market going to be seasonal based on weather, or do you want to build it around events like Earth Day or the holidays, those kinds of things? Do you want to push all your bike rebates out at once, or kind of meter them out through the year? We would have recommendations sort of based on where you're at and what your goals are, and it would varies by client for sure. the income qualification threshold. Doing some research on the demographics of your area is really important here. So you know how to sort of prepare, and set the number of vouchers you would want to go, for example, to income qualified versus market rate applicants, and just be ready to make sure you're setting expectations up front, and also adjusting along the way. If you get initially, if we do a release in the spring and find out, hey, we had a lot more income qualified applicants than we thought we would have, you can adjust down the road, but you got to start somewhere and with a plan. Incentive levels are important. We've seen through our programs the market respond in somewhat predictable ways, depending on income level, to the voucher amounts, and being careful not to, you want to make every dollar go as far as possible in terms of getting more bikes on the road. So, it would be easy just to say everyone gets $3,000, but that's not the way we go. Setting the voucher levels at a place where it sort of aligns with the demand to make sure that, vouchers are being utilized. It is a lot of extra work to issue a voucher, watch it expire, and reissue it again and again if you have the wrong incentive levels. And, also, you have to consider up front, like, you don't want to set the vouchers at, let's use a number, $1,500 in your first round, and then lower them to $1,200 the next round, because then you'll have folks who are looking at like, hey, I could have gotten $1,500 and now I'm getting $1,200. You don't want to kind of create that resentment in the market. So a lot of planning around voucher incentive levels up front, and kind of looking at the data. We would have some pretty strong recommendations around that. And then finally, the distribution model of those vouchers, first come, first serve versus what we call random selection. We think this random selection model is much more appropriate for most markets, especially when there is an expectation that there will be high demand. And as Joel was mentioning, it does allow us to sort of parse out the process to make it more equitable for applicants of all types. Just kind of bringing it all together here. The way we lay out our process allows for us to, during it, kind of take a step back and analyze things, but also for the applicants to have more time in between stages to prepare. So we typically start with a registration event, and we keep that very lean for those folks who are registering, because everyone will not receive a voucher. We don't want to put the amount of work it takes to fully qualify on everyone who is seeking one until they get selected for a voucher. So it's basically name, address, so we can confirm that they're in the territory, and maybe some questions about that would help you put them into a market segment of your choosing. Because in the random selection event, we're able to sort of separate or create buckets to segment folks into. So you could say there's three different types of applicant. I want to give 100 vouchers to this type, to type A, 100 to type B, 100 to type C, and asking some simple questions, whether it's geography-based or income-based or some other criteria. We have the flexibility to kind of separate those out, so we make sure we issue the right number of vouchers to each type of each segment. And then after we run a registration, we look at who's applied, what the demand looks like. We can adjust those buckets, conduct the random selection, which awards vouchers in the quantities we have available to those market segments that we're targeting. We give a certain amount of time for redemption, which is also flexible and adjustable along the way if we see the market behave in a certain way. And then, come back and analyze what happened. What was our yield rate on every voucher we issued? What was the feedback from some of the customers, or some of the applicants who did buy bikes, who didn't buy bikes? What were the reasons? And then you can regroup before your next registration period. Maybe you want more vouchers. Maybe you want different market segments. Maybe you want more time for vouchers to be redeemed, those kinds of things. So this process allows for that iteration, but design up front is really important to make sure you're hitting the right notes with your market. With that, I'm going to check for questions. I don't see any right now, but hopefully we'll have a couple later, and hand it off to Madeline.
Hey everybody, so I'm going to take you guys kind of through the applicant's journey applying, and then we'll take a quick look at the end at what it looks like on the retailer side. So Joel, if you could advance the slide for me, or Dan, sorry. So the applicant's journey is going to begin on the programs page on the sponsoring organization's website. So this is going to be the central information hub. The one we're looking at is for the city of Boston. And having this hosted on the sponsoring organization's website, people know where to look at it. You can really control the message there as opposed to doing most of the messaging on the portal. There's going to be a button on that page. You can see it here in the screenshot that says apply here, and clicking on that will take the applicant to the portal. And here's the initial intake form. So this is where we're going to gather that information that we need to A, check that the applicant is eligible, and B, if there is segmentation, get them into what Dan called the buckets and what I call application types. So in Boston, that program was unique in that applicants could qualify either by income or age or disability status. So we needed to gather all of that information to make sure that we sorted those applicants into the correct place. So they could choose whether or not to share income, whether or not to share disability status, and then we collect birth date, and of course, make sure that they live in the city of Boston. We can move to the next one. So assuming the applicant fills out that information and is eligible, my imaginary applicant was eligible as an income eligible adult here, they'll get this screen. If they're not eligible, they'll get a screen that lets them know why that was the case. They're going to go ahead and click this blue button and move on to the next page, where if you choose, you can then collect some survey data. This is a good place for data collection because every applicant will go through this stage. Whereas once the selection's happened, you're only going to be able to collect data from people who were selected. So generally, the initial registration period is going to be a week to 2 weeks, depending on the program and your goals. And then there'll be a random selection on the scheduled date. And go ahead and do the next slide. And those who are selected will get an email like this letting them know. Once they click that link, they'll go back to the portal. And this is where we're going to go ahead and verify eligibility information. So everything in the first stage is self-attested. Here at the second stage is where we actually collect documents. This makes initial registration really easy for everyone. They don't have to wrestle through uploading documents if that's not something that is in their particular technological wheelhouse. It also gives us more time to help those who do need help with document upload, since there's not a time crunch at this stage of the process. And then the other thing that it does is we don't collect personally identifying information from anyone we don't need to, which is just helpful from a data security standpoint. Go ahead and do the next slide. Submitted all that information and we have approved it. They're going to go ahead and get voucher codes. They'll look something like this. They receive these by email as well with a nice explainer on what participating retailers they can use them as at. Voucher code validity is generally about 60 to 90 days, depending on the program. And then they present these codes to any of the participating retailers in person. We have them check ID at the bike shops in general to make sure that the person who was issued the code is the person purchasing the bike in order to get that point of sale discount off of the bike. If we move to the next, and then this is what the retailer is going to see. It's the same portal, so same website, which makes it easy. If they have a retailer account, they'll be able to enter codes, double check the validity. The name of the applicant is actually not in this Oh yeah, it is. It just, I put Boston resident. So they'll be able to double check the name, that it's valid, when it expires, what the amount is, and if there is a restriction on the type of e-bike that can be purchased, they'll see that here too. So they have all that information that they need right at the point of sale. Once they submit this, they will have to upload a receipt and answer any questions that you want to collect data on the bikes themselves that are sold. And I'll pass it back to Dan.
Well, it looks like we have a question from Zach.
Yeah.
So are they notified of their eligibility immediately, or will it take a couple of days for processing?
So if they're, Zach, are you asking if it's when their application is approved or when they fill out that first screener form? Trying to find the Q&A.
You might be on mute. Why don't you go? I think it might be hard-coded mute. So why don't we can just talk about both real quick.
Yeah. So an applicant, when they fill out that first screening form, they're going to know if they're eligible or not. They'll receive a message if they weren't eligible, and they'll receive a button to continue if they are. Once they've uploaded documents, it does take a few days for us to review. Those are manually reviewed. So at that point, the person's already self-attested, eligible based on their self-attestation, but we do verify. And that is a manual process. We generally say 10 days, but it just depends on the size of the program.
Yeah, and we generally recommend that retailers submit vouchers within 48 hours, if not immediately, because the only way to deactivate it is once the retailer enters that voucher code, then that immediately deactivates the voucher. And so we don't want people to be able to use it multiple times. So that's another important point. But yeah, and we often see, depending on the client, the client can decide how long of a cure period they want. So if somebody submits information that, doesn't have everything we need, we usually give them a chance to go back, and they have a certain amount of time to clean it up before we sort of have to move to the next person. And that's, decided by the client on what makes sense for them.
Gotcha. Thank you. Also, I love that the Boston resident's name is Jason Tatum.
Yes, I think that is the fake bike store that I created in Boston. Was during the Celtics playoff run a year or two ago. So I think they were all like that.
All right. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Kristen.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thanks, Dan. I'm Kristen Line. I'm the sustainability manager here in Tacoma, Washington. And yeah, just going to give a brief overview of our projects that happened this spring and summer. It was a little complicated and then a little not complicated because we were actually kind of piggybacking on a statewide e-bike rebate program that the state had contracted with APTIM to run a statewide program. And then we got a specific grant from our state to run kind of a separate program. And we got the grant at around the same time we found out about the state one. So it's like, let's do these concurrently where we can. So I won't get into a lot of details about that part because I think it's probably too unique to be that useful to others, but that is a little bit of the context for it. And the funding for ours came from, we have a Washington State carbon pollution cap and invest program. And so that's where our funding came for this program. All right, Dan, next slide. So for our Tacoma specific part, it was through this statewide grant program that was really focused on helping overburdened communities highly impacted by air pollution. So you can see this map of Tacoma, and the blue element is where that grant wanted to focus resources and air quality mitigation. It also happens to be around where Interstate 5 travels through Tacoma. So kind of hints the lower air quality there. And we did, I think, able to, again, we use the exact same requirements that the state was using. So in terms of what the rebate amounts were going to be and what the income eligibility was going to be. And I think it's a fairly generous income eligibility requirements that you can see here. Although again, we were limited to the $300 and the $1,200 through the statewide program, which was really laid out in state legislation from a couple of years ago. All right, yeah, next slide. So as part of our grant, we not only received money for the actual rebates, but then for some of the engagement outreach and e-bike rider support. And so this was a really quick turnaround project. So we received our grant in probably February, and the program had to be completed by the end of June, both the statewide program and then our part. So we really had to move fairly quickly, but did already have some community partners in place to help us do some of this really critical outreach, really in the month of April primarily. And so we worked with a couple nonprofits, one focused on active transportation and commuting. And so we would have e-bike community parties at neighborhood parks to both answer questions about the e-bikes and encourage everyone to apply. And then we partnered with some community ambassadors that the city has frequently utilized, which are local leaders who were compensated to deliver culturally relevant outreach in their communities and were fluent in Spanish, Cambodian, and Vietnamese. And then we also did kind of, our own more traditional social and media as well. So folks were hearing about it kind of from a state level perspective in the month of April and early May, and then through our own Tacoma ones as well. Yeah, next page. So again, how we did this is folks could apply just through the APTIM portal. So there was a link on the state's page, and there was a link on our website. And people again applied. They didn't necessarily know which program they were applying for, because they were really applying for the one and the same. And then what ended up happening is they ran a statewide kind of drawing of names, and then a week later ran a Tacoma specific drawing of the names. And so these results here I'm showing that are kind of for both program or funding sources, how many Tacomans ended up applying. So a little less than 2,000 applied for an e-bike rebate. I think a bit over 1,000 were selected. Of those then, people that filled in all their extra paperwork maybe and income verification, 680 received a rebate. And then of those, 401 actually went to the bike stores and got their rebates. And as you can see there, that the vast majority of them were for the $1,200 for lower income residents. Next slide. So we also, as folks were again getting their vouchers, were able to send an email out, kind of also letting them know about some of these adult learn to ride classes and support that the city and again some of our community partners were going to be offering. And so we worked with a local nonprofit bike shop to do several classes, as well as provided safety equipment for them as well. And next slide, maybe last slide. Yeah, so some of the overall lessons learned of this is that as you can see on the last slide, that those kind of generous low-income rebates were key. Not only, I think, the income threshold, but then the $1,200 really quite good uptake in moving people from application to actually getting a bike. But the $300 was really not nearly enough to move many people. which I think we all kind of suspected that from the beginning, but our hands were tied because of the legislative bill creating this. I think it was really important that we did the prep with the bike shop. So, APTIM was doing that statewide, but then we had our folks also engaging pretty regularly in those key couple months with our local bike shops as well. And then again, that specific outreach and support. So, folks were reaching out to APTIM if they had questions on their application and paperwork, but then we were also getting calls and emails as well. And so really kind of trying to triage a lot of that support and that phase of it, as well as helping people, just kind of navigate and be a live, like local voice to help people get through all this. You can see some of our costs. And again, this is just the portion that was our Tacoma specific grant. And I think it ended up being 215 of the 400 bikes were paid for through our specific grant. I think there were some in that rebate admin. I think because we were the state had already developed this process with APTIM that we could just kind of piggyback on. I think we were able to keep those admin costs pretty low. And then these are just some of the figures we use for that outreach, and then the support services that we provided. So yeah, we're super excited to have, over 400 Tacomans riding around on e-bikes now. We're a really hilly coastal city. And so e-bikes make a lot of sense here because of the elevation changes throughout our city. And yeah, just really excited about this program. We hope that we can look for additional funds in the next few years to continue, maybe not at the same numbers, but yeah, just really excited that we were able to partner with the state and APTIM and getting more e-bikes out. I'll say one other side benefit of this is that through some of the outreach and support that we've been able to provide, we've just gotten more people again involved in like active transportation in Tacoma. We have a bicycle and pedestrian technical advisory group that meets monthly, and two of the folks that just got e-bikes have joined that organization to help provide recommendations to the city and city council on our work as well. So we're definitely excited about it, and I think it was a terrific program.
All right, thank you, Kristen. We have a little time for some Q&A. If anyone has a question, go ahead and raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Go ahead, Zach.
Hey, first off, thank you guys for an awesome presentation. I had two questions. They're not super related to each other, so I'll just ask them both at the same time. You mentioned in the application process there being some restrictions that the bike shop side could see on their voucher certificate. Could you go into what some of those restrictions would be? And secondly, have you ever seen a government body like the city of Boston, for example, do a project like this in-house where they didn't really use the bike shop route where they use vouchers at bike shops, but rather like somebody would come to the city and turn in their voucher and get a bike there?
Yeah, I can start on, I'll do the second one first and then we can turn it over to them. So I think there's a lot of different models. In some cases, yeah, the city just has a bike giveaway in a sense, right? And so they've bought the bikes. I think Paige, who's on the phone, I think that's what she did in her community where she got some grants. And so the city, negotiated a price to, let's say, buy 100 bikes and then just gave the bike away as opposed to a voucher that then turns into a bike. So there's a lot of things. And then certainly there's lots of examples around the country of cities managing it themselves. Again, we think it's a great option. I think where it gets complicated is when, again, it depends on the size, and just the number of people who are applying can overwhelm sometimes the city resources. And so that's when it gets complicated. So Madeline, you want to handle the sort of question about the restrictions?
Yeah, so in addition to grouping applicants and having different voucher levels for different applicant criteria, for instance, in, market rate or low income, we can also have different voucher amounts for different types of e-bike. So in the Boston program, there is a different voucher amount for what we call standard e-bikes, and then for cargo e-bikes. And then there's also one for adaptive e-bikes. So if there's a restriction on the type of bike that can be purchased with that voucher, that's the go up on that page.
Oh, okay. So it's more of a restriction on the type of bike, not the rider or something like that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no information that's shown to the shop about the rider other than their voucher amount and the bike type.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And,
thank you guys.
And I think in general, we would recommend not sort of segregating by bike type. It just gets a little complicated because if somebody applies for, they think they want a cargo bike. I think what we found across the country is that people don't realize how heavy cargo bikes are. And so they think they're going to bring it up to their second floor walk up, it's complicated. And so having just a voucher amount that they can then turn into the bike that makes sense for them. They're typically learning about e-bikes as part of a process. And so having them had to choose sometimes can be complicated.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, that was one of our biggest customer service issues in the first couple of programs we ran was, applicants choosing a cargo bike voucher and not realizing, as Joel mentioned, just the weight of it and having to take it upstairs or whatever.
Yeah.
But also the price. So we've done some things to educate up front to help them, if you do want to have those different voucher amounts for different bike types, but generally would recommend one voucher for standard or cargo.
Yeah, and it looks like Paige very helpfully sort of attached a link to her program, and so you can learn about how she did it. The other thing that I think, talking about the voucher amount that Kristen did a good job of explaining, as surprisingly, when we did look across all of our programs, it's pretty consistent that the average is right around, the average bike price is somewhere between $1,800 to $2,000. And so, that's where, $1,200 to $1,500 seems like a pretty good for an income qualified, that they're willing to pay some part of the copay. So certainly we had a lot of programs where they give it to them, and that's, it can be very helpful. But it seems like, you got to get, close to that $1,500 mark is where the sweet spot is, $1,200, $1,500 for an income qualified person, because the bike's going to cost about $1,800. And so there's just minimizing the out of pocket's important. I'll give everybody a minute to think about it. So Kristen, so what do you think what have you heard back from your residents about the program? What are the sort of comments back that people have said?
Oh gosh. To that last point a little bit, I think for some folks, the 1,200 wasn't enough. Some people couldn't even, pay the sales tax amount on a bike. And so I think that certainly shut out some of the, very lower income. But I think we had good feedback from the bike shops, and, again, the people that got the bikes and certainly attended the classes. Some of the individual stories are just so inspiring. People that haven't ridden a bike since they were a kid, kind of opening up the possibilities. So I think, there were some, I think especially because we were trying to roll this out so quickly, I think there were, some challenges in communication. So I'm not going to say this was all smooth sailing and there were no, frustrated customers or applicants, but I think people were excited about it. I've certainly, talked to people that, they're riding their bikes or, around now and are super, super thankful for it.
Yeah. I think the other question we get a lot is, with a program like this where the bike store is able to handle the volume. And I think we could certainly say that in Denver, when I started the program, so in Denver, it was meant to be a 3-year, $9 million program, and it turned into a 3-month, $9 million program. And we were just coming out of COVID and supply chain issues. I didn't think there was any way that the marketplace would be able to absorb, 9,000 vouchers in such a short period of time. And I think the bike stores are remarkably resilient. They have ways to get bikes. And so I think it's always good to prepare them, to let them know, how many vouchers we're going to release, and here's the timeline. Make sure they have the bikes that are qualified. But in general, the supply side has done a pretty good job. Dan or Madeline, I don't think I've heard of issues. There might be a specific bike that somebody wants and they have to order it. But in general, I think we've rarely had an issue of the bikes not being available. If you sort of prepare the marketplace for what's coming.
Yeah, I'd agree there. I think we also sometimes hear concerns about seasonality, that there's going to be an issue getting bikes in winter, and that's not something that we've seen make a at least significant impact. So yeah, the bike stores seem ready to sell bikes.
Sorry, Zach, go ahead.
Hey, has there ever been, I know you mentioned equipment as well as the e-bikes themselves. Has there ever been any issues with people maintaining the e-bikes once they have them? Like for instance, I ride an e-bike to work every day and I had to replace brake pads this weekend. It was about $120. And so is there a way to are there maintenance vouchers or anything like that? Or do you just kind of have an understanding with the bike stores that they'll upkeep them to the best of their ability, or how does ongoing maintenance go in these programs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think number one is one of the reasons we, as Dan mentioned, we think it's so important to do brick and mortar is, as Dan mentioned, a lot of times they won't service bikes that they don't sell, particularly with battery issues. And so that's why it becomes, incredibly important to partner with your local bike stores. I think, was it Boulder that did a voucher for maintenance? Was that one, Dan? I can't remember now.
Yeah, we have run that or offered that as providing a voucher for maintenance. And at times we've sort of tied a voucher or an sort of a gift card or something like that down the road. Like when we reach out with a survey, if you answer the survey, you can get, for example, you could offer some maintenance, free maintenance or something like that, and we could cover it. So there's opportunities, but we start, as Joel mentioned, we start with, hey, let's do local brick and mortar. So at least you have a place to roll that bike back into if you do need some maintenance on it.
And
Yeah,
that is,
I'm good. Go ahead. No.
sorry, that is just something to consider when establishing criteria for your participating retailers. And all the programs I run, we do require that participating retailers have a service center. So no one who just sells bikes and doesn't service them, it doesn't come up a ton, but there are situations where that's the case.
Gotcha.
So requiring the service center at least exist.
I think the other thing I was going to say is, I think it's a great idea. One of the things that was interesting about Boulder too was that they tied the voucher for maintenance to collecting additional information. So, people are incredibly excited to have it. And so it does offer an opportunity to not only get the bike service, but to help them with the evaluation and collecting data. That's really important. And sorry, Kristen, I'm curious what you guys are thinking about in terms of maintenance.
Not been thinking about it. But to that point about data, I know that the Stagel, and I don't think it's come out yet, but through the Washington statewide program, the university was going to be doing some follow-up kind of usage surveying and data. And so we'll be very curious to see when that report comes out, maybe later this year. But yeah, I don't think we've necessarily thought about the maintenance aspect or providing vouchers at this point.
Yeah. Then we have a question about, did you have programs in areas with moderate to robust bike share networks, and how does an e-bike incentive program complement a bike share programs? And I think what we'd say is they're both important, right? They serve different functions. Certainly Boston has both, right? And so, for instance, Boston, incredibly important. You couldn't get an adaptive bike, for instance, in a bike share program, I don't believe. typically fitted, and so there's can be important points. It's also a little bit harder for people to use it for daycare every day. So I think that there's a place for both, and I think that's where we would recommend that cities and utilities and communities think about it, that there are different use cases and that each has a place to play in helping people make transportation affordable, helping reduce vehicle miles traveled. The other thing that we're seeing is a lot of e-bikes now for things like delivery, which I think is harder to do with a bike share. So, because you often have to resend, put them back and everything. So I think both have an incredibly important point to play in how we reduce the dependence on cars and give people more access to mobility.
I was just going to jump on there as someone who talks to the applicants a lot. Some applicants that I talk to, this is the first piece of privately owned like transportation that they've ever had. They've never had anything other than public transportation. And public transportation, bike share is awesome. It serves a lot of people, but I just hear endless stories about how it's opened up, a job opportunity that wouldn't otherwise be there, or there's just so much. So yeah, I think that I'm just echoing Joel's point. It's not either or, it's both.
And I mean, one of the things we had to learn early on, I think it was in Boulder and somewhat in Denver as well, is how to deal with homeless population, right? So often an important point is residency, right? You have to be a resident of a city or community that's funding this, and sometimes it'd be hard for people to prove that. And so we had to work with shelters to come up with ways. And there was somebody in Boulder, I believe, that the bike was the difference between them sort of being able to then get a job and then move into more permanent housing. So these really are transformational ways to impact communities. And so we're excited to see, I think, just beginning to sort of understand the power of these e-bikes to really make a difference in people's lives. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for helping us out today. And thanks, everybody, for participating. Feel free to reach out. Again, we know we have to go pretty fast and high level. We're happy to, go in more depth. And again, if you have specific questions, please reach out, and we're more than happy. We understand, to much who've received, much, much has been given, much is expected. So we've been very fortunate to be able to run so many programs and understand that with that comes the expectation that we should try to share it so that people can learn from what we've seen.
All right. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everybody. And I would note that Madeline just posted on the chat a video from our Boston program. Take a look at that before you log out. And thanks a lot for joining us. Hope to talk to you soon. Take care.